All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, happy Thursday. Good to see you all. We are in the middle of Tractate Sanhedrin now, and deep into the execution material. So I will tell you from an editorial perspective in this series, sometimes we have to sort of figure out what the right voice for talking about execution is. Are we going to be a little flip about it because we don't really perform executions like this anymore, or are we going to be a little more, this is people losing their lives and it's kind of gruesome. This has been an interesting editorial challenge as we go through these pages. I think we're mostly here. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning and A Daily Dose of Talmud. You are, of course, in the half-hour lightning review of what we did in Daf Yomi this week, somewhere in the middle of Tractate Sanhedrin, where we have a rotation of wonderful teachers who all come and review with us. And this morning we are joined by Dr. Sarah Ronis. So Dr. Ronis, go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. I see some folks in the chat who are definitely, it's nighttime where you are. I am joining you from actually record high warm San Antonio, where it is supposed to be 85 degrees today, which is a
My kids are having a snow day in Connecticut.
right, right. So it is a toasty start to our learning this week, and really this has been a very rich week of Daf Yomi. I'd love to hear in the chat what jumped out at you as you were doing the learning. I will tell you, as I was finding a piece of text to really go into depth with you, I had like four I really wanted to learn with you. So there's a lot this week to really sink our teeth into. We started out learning the story of Achan and the forbidden goods of Cherem of Jericho. We shifted from that to talking about Joshua and some of his strengths and weaknesses. Then we shifted back to talking about execution. So what happens if a witness recants his testimony after a conviction? And then we outlined and discussed the procedure for enacting an execution by stoning. Right. So we thought about what the convicted person wears, where they stand, what happens to their bodies after death. We spent some time thinking about the importance of swift burial, the ways that even those who have been convicted of capital crimes are still created in the image of God, and that requires um, certain rituals and procedures and sensitivities as we deal with their body. We discussed very briefly how the family of the executed man is reconciled and reintegrated into the legal system, right? The idea that when someone who you love has been put to death, it ruptures your relationship to the legal system as one of, trust and constructive positivity. And so the Mishnah really thinks about how do we make sure those people can be reintegrated? Then we shifted to this great discussion about King Shapur and burial, right? Where King Shapur asks why Jews um, practice burial when, and here's your little historical nugget for today, the Zoroastrians don't practice burial in the ground. Zoroastrians practice sky burial, right, which is the exposure of bodies to be eaten um, by predatory birds. Um, in Zoroastrian tradition, the earth is sacred, and so we don't put impure things in the earth. And so King Shapur asks the rabbis, why on earth do you do this weird burial thing? And that leads to a great discussion about why do Jews do burial? We shifted from burial to discussing eulogies, who gets a eulogy, why they get a eulogy. Then we had a great discussion, and I saw Rabbi Batsum wrote about this, about medicinal dirt from a holy man's grave. Then we talked about the laws of relating to weaving a burial shroud. We talked about the possessions of the man who's been executed, right? Who takes possession of the property of someone who has been executed? Looking at some really interesting biblical examples of Navot and Yoav, and then how those examples continued to have an impact on Yoav in particular on the Davidic line. And then we started chapter 7 which discuss the four types of death penalty given to the courts, and my personal like meta favorite, this Talmudic discussion about why the Mishnah loves lists, right? They're finally saying the thing that we've been noticing for 5.5 years, which is that the Mishnah really loves lists, and they finally ask, okay, but what's going on there? So I wanna spend our time together by looking at something actually from the very first page, um, something that seems very slight, but really stuck out to me, and I thought it was worth us thinking thinking about together. And I'm going to be honest with all of you. All of the puns in the chat are making me very happy. So, but unfortunately, I'm so sorry. I'm going to ask us to shift our attention to the handout that I just put in the chat. Don't worry, I'm going to share screen. So if you don't like to have more than one thing open, that's not a problem. Oh my gosh, so many good puns here. Here we are. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. You should be able to see it on my screen, but if you'd like to have it on yours or make it bigger or any of that, you are welcome to. So this is back on the first page. We just finished talking about Achan and the Cherem, and we shifted because that happens in the time of Joshua, right? Joshua is the leader at the time of Jericho. We now shift to talking about Joshua. And the Lord said to Joshua, right? This is the verse from the book of Joshua. Get you up. Why do you lie this way on your face? Rabbi Shelah taught in a public lecture. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Joshua, your own sin is even worse than that of the other Jews, as I said to the Jewish people. And it shall be when you have gone over the Jordan that you shall set up these stones. And you have distanced yourself 60 mil from the Jordan River. All right, so let's make sure we understand the logic here. In the book of Joshua, God says to Joshua, get up. And the tone that I used is kind of intentional. Rabbi Shelah reads this as God telling Joshua, you have done something wrong. Get up. What are you doing? And Rabbi Shelah says, God is telling Joshua, you have sinned. Now, of course, the question is then, okay, so what's the sin that Joshua did? Right? And the thing that Joshua did, according to Rabbi Shelah, is he was supposed to, when they crossed the Jordan, set up these memorial stones. Maybe memorial isn't the right word. Monument stones. Thank you. He set up these monument stones. He's supposed to set up these monument stones. And they've already passed 60 miles away from the Jordan, and he still hasn't set them up. Right? So according to Rabbi Shelah, God tells Joshua, you have disobeyed God's orders, God's direct order in the book of Deuteronomy, and therefore you are a really big sinner, and that's what God is telling Joshua. Now, one piece of context here is that Rabbi Shelah is a Babylonian rabbi from the first generation of the Amoraim, of the rabbis who compile the Talmud. And he's from Babylonia, and he is one of the older members of that generation. So we next are introduced to Rav. Now, Rav is also a first generation Babylonian Amora, but he is both. He has moved there from the land of Israel, so he's a newcomer, and he's a little bit younger. So they are the same generation, but still quite different in some key ways. After Rabbi Shelah left, right, he was giving a public class, the class was over, he left. Rav placed an interpreter alongside him, and he taught. As the Lord commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Right, so he's standing there. I imagine this interpreter almost like if you've ever been to a protest where they have, the person in the middle will say something and then the circle around them will repeat it louder so that everybody can hear. He's like a human microphone. That's how I imagine the interpreter. So Rabbi Shelah leaves, Rav gets up, and he says this verse, which makes it clear that Joshua did everything Moses told him to do, right? Which means that he couldn't have disobeyed the order in Deuteronomy. If so, then what is the meaning when the verse states, get you up? God said to Joshua, you caused it. And this is what God said to him at Ai. And you shall do to Ai and her king as you did to Jericho and her king. Semicolon. That's going to be important. We're going to come back to the semicolon. Only its spoil and its cattle shall you take for a prey to yourselves. So Rav says, no. He didn't disobey God's direct order, right? That's not what Joshua did. What is the sin that caused God to say to him, get up? Right? You caused it. And Rashi here, if you just scroll down a tiny little bit, you caused it. You were not authorized to forbid them to despoil Jericho. Right? So Joshua didn't disobey God. He tried to add on to God's decree. God didn't say, you can't take anything from Jericho. Joshua said, you can't take anything from Jericho. And because that was unreasonable, Achan took stuff from Jericho, and then all the bad stuff that we read about on 44 happened. And that's why when God gives him a command at Ai, he says, you shall do exactly to Ai as you did to Jericho, except, highlight, underline, you get to keep the spoil and the cattle. It is unreasonable to expect in a context of war that people aren't going to take stuff. And if you make it forbidden, you're setting people up to fail. So this piece really struck me in a bunch of different ways. But I'm curious, either in the chat or we can get some hands up, what strikes you, what jumps out at you from this piece of Talmud? Anything jump out at you?
Lynn asks, in what other world religions are we allowed to even speculate that our mythical heroes might have sinned? I don't know the answer to that. I wouldn't assume not. We at MJL don't speak for other world religions.
Correct.
But I do think there's often this comparison, especially between Judaism and Christianity, where there's this idea in Christianity of the saint and somebody who is almost above sin and an elevation of that ideal that isn't quite as present in Judaism.
I think that is true in a lot of saint stories. Not all, but in a lot of saint stories.
Yeah.
But certainly when we think about the heroes of Hinduism and Buddhism, we do see a lot of sin, a lot of reckoning with the ways that both humans and divine beings can do the wrong thing sometimes. I'm not an expert at all religions, so I can't speak to those.
Speaking only for myself, perfect people are boring.
I agree. And Lynn, I think you're right. So Neri asks this great question, right? Why does the Talmud point out that Rav is teaching this behind Rabbi Shaila's back? And that is sort of what I noticed too, right? There's the content, which is what is Joshua's sin, and then there's this broader structure that Neri is noticing, where Rav doesn't disagree with Shaila to his face, right? With Rav Shaila to his face. He waits until he leaves, but then he not only teaches something, and he doesn't actually say, I disagree with you, right? He just gets up and teaches a different teaching, which clearly disagrees with Rabbi Shaila. But he not only teaches it, but he does it in a way where everyone, right, where the message is going to get out even more accessibly. Right. So I'm curious, what do we think Rav is doing? Anyone have any ideas on what Rav is doing? And here I want to remind us that Rav Shaila is a little older and he's local, and Rav is a little younger and an immigrant. And Lynn asks, is Rav obliquely throwing shade on Rav Shaila? I would say no. Rav is explicitly throwing shade on Rav Shaila, right? He gets up and he says, no, Joshua didn't sin. Instead, didn't do this horrible sin where he disobeys God. Instead, his sin was that he actually, was even more extra than God when it came to conquest. Any thoughts? I know it's early for some of us, but I saw where you're all coming from. And for a lot of you, it's later. It's later than it is here. Yeah. All right. So I'm seeing some great stuff in the chat, right? So um, Susan notes that maybe he's trying to rescue Joshua's reputation without offending Rabbi Shela, right? That maybe it's not about the two of them, it's about Joshua. What do you mean Joshua would have directly disobeyed an order from God? Right? So, but he doesn't want to offend Rabbi Shela, but it just doesn't make sense to him. And Mary suggests that maybe he's giving space between the two, even if he disagrees. And Ellen adds to this, right? Maybe this is another wonderful example of the Talmud expanding the view, right? Giving us new perspectives, right? And I think, there's two ways to think about this. One is to say they're really just disagreeing about Joshua's sin, right? He really just doesn't think Rabbi Shela is right about Joshua's sin. And he wants to make sure that everyone in the room doesn't think that Joshua has sinned against a direct order of God. Now, the other possibility is that this is in some ways also about Rabbi Shela and Rav, right? Which is to say that there is a disagreement between them, and Rav doesn't choose to disagree with Rav Shela in person. Right now, Sharna notes maybe he doesn't have the confidence to speak in front of Shela, right? I mean, that certainly is a possibility. Another possibility is maybe he just doesn't think he's going to change Rabbi Shela's mind, right? If he's older and he's local and he's been there for a while and he's sort of set in his ways, maybe Rav knows, right? Maybe Rav knows Rabbi Shela is not going to change his mind. So why get into a fight with someone who isn't going to change their mind? Any other possibilities for why he doesn't want to disagree with Rav Shela? Those are the two that I had thought of, right? Those are the two I had thought of. Now, Lynn suggests because you're not supposed to disagree with your teacher. Now, I want to note Rav Shela is not Rav's teacher. He is a peer, but a little older peer. He's that cool kid in camp who's been there for longer than you and knows some of the songs, but isn't a counselor, for those who went to Jewish summer camp. So, one of the things that really strikes me here is that for whatever reason, Rav decides not to challenge Rav Shela to his face. But he feels really strongly about this idea. And so not only does he teach it the way that he thinks it should be taught, but he also takes action in a way that the Talmud doesn't tell us Rav Shela does, to make sure that literally everyone understands what he's saying, right? And I thought about this because, we are living in a time of great disagreement around all kinds of key issues, and thinking about, who is it worth fighting with, right? Who is a productive partner in argument, right? That iron sharpens iron that I saw someone mention in the chat, and who is an unproductive partner in argument. And if you find that a partner is unproductive, how do you still go about representing your ideas in a way that can be heard and make an impact? And so thinking about this piece, I really just thought about what an interesting model that like maybe not every fight is worth having, and we need to figure out the right fights and how to communicate effectively. So that was this piece. And then we kept reading, and I brought this in. I will be honest with you, it doesn't relate to Rav Shela and Rav, but it was the next piece of the Talmud. And those of you who have been learning with me for a while, you know how much I love demons. So I had to bring this in. So once we're talking about Joshua, we're going to keep talking about Joshua. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood over him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Right? A guy comes up holding a sword. You definitely want to know, Are you one of us or are you one of the enemies? And the man says back to him, no, but I am captain of the host of the Lord. I have now come. And Joshua fell to his face on the earth, right? He is the captain of God's armies, and he has come down to earth. He's neither human, he's not a human for Joshua, he's not a human against Joshua. Spoiler alert, he is the angelic captain of God's angelic army. And Joshua fell on his face on the earth and bowed down. Okay, amazing scene in the book of Joshua. Really just very rich. Now, how could Joshua do so? But doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say it is prohibited for a person to greet another person at night, as we are concerned that perhaps he is a demon, right? How could Joshua have gone up to somebody and said, hey, at night, when we know you're not allowed to greet people at night when visibility is low, because that person might actually be a demon. And then you're going to be in big trouble because demons like to be left alone. So here's how the Talmud answers that question. It is different there, right? No, here it was fine for Joshua to greet this man because the man said to Joshua, I am captain of the host of the Lord. I have now come, right? You don't have to worry he's a demon. He's literally just told you he's an angel. Now, of course, Joshua does the greeting before the man says this. So we do have a little bit of a chronological problem here, but it is kind of fun to think about, right? Oh, don't worry that the man's a demon because he's an angel, right? The people who you see at night who you may not know could be all of these, different intermediary beings who are supernatural in some way. Now, Emily asks, can we trust demons not to lie and say that they are not demons? Emily, hold on to your socks because that is literally the Talmud's question. But perhaps he was in fact a demon and he was lying, right? What if he was lying? It is learned that demons do not utter the name of heaven in vain. Demons don't take God's name in vain. So if he wasn't the angel, right? If he was a demon, he would never have said he is the captain of the host of the Lord, because that would be taking, right? If it's not true, it's taking God's name in vain. So, therefore, we learn that demons do not utter the name of heaven in vain. Now, I love this piece, right? And yes, they seem to think that the demons, Lynn asks, do they think demons would avoid even saying those? It doesn't tell us. But the book of Joshua uses the divine holy name of God that is 4 letters, and they certainly think that demons don't use the tetragrammaton, the holy letter name, the holy 4-lettered name of God in vain. And so, what I want us to notice here is that I don't know if you know any humans. I know humans. The Talmud certainly knows humans, and the Talmud knows. We're going to see this later on very, very explicitly. The Talmud knows that people take God's name in vain all the time. It's a sin. It's punishable, but it's a thing that people do. But apparently, while humans are fallible and we disrespect God's name, demons do not, right? And it doesn't say can't, it says they don't, right? That demons do not use the name of God, right? That demons respect the tetragrammaton as a particularly holy name. And so Joshua knows this isn't a demon because a demon might lie about some things, but would never use the name of God in vain. And that's a really important reminder for us as we think about these discussions of the law, that the rabbis aren't just thinking about the law as something that applies to humans, right? That the law, the system of divine law that they're a part of applies to humans, but there are parts of it that seem to also, right, that demons have their own divine law. They're also subject to different kinds of laws. And not only that, but I would say, unlike humans, at least in this case, demons seem to actually follow the law. So we get a really, when we put these two pieces together, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see more of you. When we put these two passages together, we can see, I think, a couple of things, right? One is some people are not necessarily worth arguing with for all kinds of reasons, right? Some people are not productive conversation partners in all kinds of reasons. But we also have, in some ways, a much bigger world of conversation partners than we might imagine, right? That there are other people out there, other beings out there, angels and demons for the rabbis, who are um, bound by different laws, who are engaged in Jewish law, who are, all kinds of ways of thinking about and with humans in some really productive ways. And I didn't think I was going to do this, but I will just note because I'm seeing a lot of questions about demons in the chat. Um, I will note two things. One, I gave a lecture for My Jewish Learning on demons. That video is still on YouTube. You can find it somewhere. And two, this is literally the subject of my first book, which is going to paperback in April. And it's available for pre-order now. Um, Sorry, that was like very.
Welcome you all.
What, Rahel?
I'm sorry, I was pulling up the video and I didn't realize my audio was on. I'm going to give everyone the link now.
Oh, excellent. Yes, that video will give you more about what demons in the Talmud are doing as a whole, right? We've seen them as we go. One of the nice things about the Talmud is that we sort of see things as we go over and over again, but then we certainly have questions about well, if we just pull those pieces out, what do we notice? So that's really what I wanted to think about with you today, right? The ways that the Talmud thinks about who is a productive person to be in community with, who isn't a productive person to be in community with, what is sin, how do we, try to affect change. I will note that the today, and this is true as well in the Talmud, Rav is a lot more famous than Rav Shela, and we follow a lot more of Rav's halachic opinions than we do Rav Shela. We're seeing some kind of generational transmission there. We're also seeing the importance and value of um, listening to people who are coming from other places who have new kinds of knowledge, right? That the local knowledge is helpful, but that we need new kinds of knowledge there as well. And so there are just a lot of really beautiful ideas in this short piece of text, I think, for us to take with us um, in our week and our journey through the Daf. Oh my goodness, there are so many links in the chat right now. I'm very overwhelmed. But with that, let me wish you a wonderful week of learning. There's some really interesting stuff coming up. A wonderful Shabbos, and I will see you another time.
Thank you. Everybody have a Shabbat Shalom, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.